feel like a newsreader. Morning ladies, and welcome back to part 3 of our spring equinox improvisationally pieced block. No sewing machine today, as you can see, because it's all hand sewing. We're going to make the circles to decorate our block and applique them by hand. If you remember, in the original plan I had sketched on some circles and we're going to tackle those today. I'm still not sure about this guy. He might make it in or he might not, but we'll see how we go. So the first thing we need to tackle is figuring out what size these circles need to be on our finished block, because we did this small sketch in a 4.5 inch square and then we scaled our whole block up to 12.5 inches. So whatever size these guys are, they need to be approximately 3 times larger. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to measure the diameter of each of these circles, multiply it by 3, and then I'll have the diameter for the circles that go on the finished block. So it's not really something you can comfortably do with our normal rulers, our patchwork ruler, so I'm just using a normal school ruler, if you like. And I'll just make a list as I go along. So starting with the smallest one, that's 1/4 inch. That's 3/8 inch. That's 1/2 inch. And I'd say this guy might be 3/8 as well, so we'll call it by 2. That one's about 3/4 inch. That one's 1 inch. That one's 1.25 inches. This little fella is another 3/8. So put those by 3. And then this one, I would say if you drew out the full circle, you'd be close enough on a 3-inch diameter. And now we have to multiply all of these by 3 to get the diameter of the ones we're going to put in the finished block. So 3 by 1/4 is 3/4 inch. 3 by 3/8 is 9/8, which is 1 1/8. 3 by 1/2 is 1 1/2. 3 by 3/4 is 2 1/4. 3 inches. 3 3/4. And 9 inches, which is massive, but we'll only be using the little section of it. And at this stage, you can either get out your protractor, compass I should say, and make very accurate circles, or you can look at what you have around the house that might be about the right size. So these are the bits and pieces I found around the house that were approximately the right size to draw my circles around. In fact, it's the only use you're going to get out of your 10-cent coins at the moment, because nobody wants to take cash money in the shops. And it's about right for the 3/4 inch. I had a spool of thread for the 1 1/8, a bit off my sewing machine, the lid of my furniture polish,
tin of tomatoes. Who hasn't got tin tomatoes in their house at the moment? I had a roll of parcel tape. It's actually 4 inches across, but it'll do grand for the 3 3/4 inch one. And then I got one of my 9-inch, what my mother used to call a rasher plate, to draw the little arc. So the next thing we're going to do now is cut those out and try them out on our block. I've cut out my 9 circles, or 8 circles and an arc to be precise, and I took my time over them because I wanted to get the edges as smooth as possible. I didn't want any sort of flat planes like an old 50p piece, because that will affect the final result. What I need to do now is try them out on the background of the block. Here's our block background, freshly pressed, and I'm just going to lay out my little circles in accordance, approximately in accordance with the original design that I made. And then have a look and see what you think. Now, in the case of the two that go over the place where the swoosh meets the background, I'm going to add a little extra detail because I'm going to slightly change colour in the fabric where it goes over the join. So I'm just going to mark where the transition is, and then I'll cover each section of that with a different fabric. And in actual fact, particularly on this one, you can sort of feel where the fabric changes. And you can use that as your guideline. The next step now is to pick out the colours that I'm going to use for these and cover the circles. Just before you do that though, I would suggest that you take a final look at your layout, make any little adjustments you want to make, and then take a photograph on your phone or whatever, just so you have it for reference when you have the circles covered and made and you want to put them back in the right position on the block. I have a nice selection of bits and pieces here from my scrapbooks for covering the circles. And as I said before, we're going to go from wintry colours to sort of off-whites and whites, down through pale greens and into the very deep greens as we denote the transition from winter into spring. So the next thing to do is cover the circles, and I'll show you how to do that now. I've pinned my circles to my fabrics and I have cut around, leaving a margin of a good 1/3 of an inch. It's more generous than our normal seam allowance. You may have noticed that I haven't tackled the two that change colour halfway through because I'm going to use a slightly different technique on them, and I'll talk about that in a few minutes. So they can stay where they are for now. What we're going to do now is do a small running stitch around the outer edge of the circles so that we can gather them up over the paper. What I'm going to do now is start running a gathering thread around the edges of the circles, and I'll have to do the same thing with all of them. So it's a small running stitch. The smaller you make it, the neater the curves will be when you finish. Okay, when I get back around to the beginning again, what I'm going to do is pull the two ends And I'm going to make it slightly tighter than you would expect, so it's slightly curved. And make a triple knot. A double knot doesn't seem to be enough in these cases. You can do your double knot, but you still see there's scope to pull it a little bit tighter. So that's probably about all right, and then I'll do a third knot. And that should keep its shape. And then just trim. Take out your pin. And if I bring in the iron, we're going to press this down flat, and we're pressing, making sure that the edge is getting as flat as possible. And then iron it on the other side as well, just to make sure that you have a nice flat circle and a nice sharp edge for sewing on. And then you can actually take out your paper. Sometimes it's easier to, this just doesn't want to come. There we go. And you have a nice circular circle to put onto your background. So I'm going to do exactly the same with all the others, and I'll be back to you when they're done. All my simple circles, if you like, and I've pinned and tacked them. I've taken the paper out and pinned and tacked them onto my background. And I even had a go at one of my two-tone ones here, but I'm going to demonstrate on the other one what I did. I just also wanted to show you the arc, the one that isn't a full circle, because I've done it in a slightly different way. Because it's going to go off the bottom edge of the piece, I've tacked through the paper. Sorry, trying to figure out how to show it to you. I've tacked through the paper on the bottom, and I've trimmed the bottom edge to be level with the paper. And then I did my gathering as usual along the curved edge, but at the beginning and end, as you can see, I have stitched through the paper because it was just too kind of loose and floppy otherwise. And then if I turn on my phone and look at my image, I can see where to position this. I don't know if you can see my screen there, but I can see that it's kind of over here. Even a little more over than that. And I'll just pin and tack that in place. And then my other circle, which is this one, which is going to go there. I'll show you how we put that together now, because it's a little bit different to the straightforward circles. So now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to cut along the line where the fabric colour changes. And in actual fact, trying to keep it round, sometimes I find it's easier if you just push your blades if they're sharp enough, or you can cut it in the normal way. Okay, and I have 2 different pieces of fabric that are going to go on each of these. So as we did with the other circles, I'm going to pin the circles onto the wrong side of the fabric. Or the circle sections onto the wrong side of the fabric. And then I'm going to trim my fabric again to about 1/3 of an inch. You don't have to be very precise about this, but just give yourself enough room to put the running stitches in. You don't want to leave it too big here because it's going into a convex curve and there'll be a little bit of stretch, but there should be enough stretch in your fabric to do it, and if there isn't, you can make a little snip. Now, as I did with the arc at the bottom of the square of the block, I'm actually going to tack through the paper on these parts. And I'm following the curve of the paper. As I say, there's a little bit of stretch because of the weave of the cotton, and that should be enough to get us round this curve because it's not a very pronounced convex curve. I always get convex and concave mixed up. So if I'm saying convex and I mean concave, I mean it's an inward curving curve as opposed to an outward curving curve. And they're the ones that give us trouble because the fabric is having to stretch over a larger area. And I'm also going to, at the beginning and end of the outer circle, I'm going to tack through the paper just to keep it secure. I'm actually using an embroidery needle for this because it's all I could find, but it'll do grand. I still haven't figured out how to tie a knot without licking the string, which I probably shouldn't be doing at the moment, but nobody's going to be near this for a long time, so it doesn't really matter. So just at the start of my semicircle, I'm going to tack through the paper. And then I'm going to proceed, as we did with the other ones, in doing a running stitch around the edge. get down to nearly the end here, I'm just going to tack it on. Take out my pins, give it a quick press, to get those nice sharp edges for appliquing. Okay, and I'm going to do my second one in exactly the same way, and then I'll show you how to attach them together. I have my two pieces and now I need to stitch them together, and I'm going to do that with our old friend, the whip stitch or over stitch. I'm going to start from one side and go across to the other, and even though we are attaching an innie curve to an outie curve, we'll be able to inch it along gradually so that we get a perfect fit and we'll have a perfect circle at the end of it. So starting at the corner of one of them, I'm going to run the thread up under the seam allowance so that the knot is hidden. You don't have to do that, it's just one of those little nice details that leave you with a very good finish on the edge, because otherwise you'd have a knot right out at the edge which might be difficult to hide later on. And small stitches, just picking up a couple of threads of the fabric each time. Just finishing off my thread there by tying a little knot and then running it through the back of one of the pieces so that it won't unravel. And there's my finished circle. I'll just give it a quick press, bring it back to you. And that's ready now to be pinned and tacked onto the main piece, the main background. Just making sure that we line up with the swoosh. I might put a couple of extra pins in to make sure that that alignment stays where it is while I'm tacking. So after I've tacked, I'll be back to you and we'll start doing our applique. So everything is tacked now and ready for me to whip stitch or over sew or applique stitch, whichever I'm feeling like. And I'm going to try and match my threads to the colours of the things that I'm appliquing. So unfortunately, would you believe I have no white thread in the house, so I'm going to have to use cream for the ones up at the back, a nice light grey for the ones in the mid, or light green for the ones in the middle, and a strong green for the ones coming towards the front. It's exactly the same stitch as we used for putting the swoosh onto the background stripes, so I won't put you through it again, and I will come back to you when I have that done. Several hundred tiny stitches later, our spring equinox block is complete. That's quite hard to say. I've taken out all the tacking stitches, and in the case of the two-tone circles, I've cut a little hole in the back so that I could remove the paper. And that's it. All you have to do now is make another one so that you can have two of them in the quilt. I hope you've enjoyed trying something new, improvising with 3 simple techniques: stripes, applique, lots of applique, and crazy patchwork.